today I'm going to take you on a very personal journey. So as Alan mentioned, I own a business along with my brother called Distribute IT. It was a business that we built up from a startup position into a fairly strong business for its sector. And we experienced a cyber incident in 2011, and that cyber incident was so severe that it brought my business down over a 3-week period. Now, we all hear about international stories about cyber attacks, and we hear about Sony, and we hear about Target and those sorts of things. So I'm here to tell you firsthand that it happens in Australia, and they can be very devastating. But before I sort of kick off into the story, I'm just going to do just a little bit of background on security. I stopped giving this slide much attention about a year or so ago because I could probably put this together every day of the week with the information that's out there in the media. And so what's happening is whenever we see a cyber attack of any nature, it hits the press very, very quickly. And of course, as we all know, when it hits the press, the damage and the fallout to businesses in terms of reputation can be very quick and very severe. And it's not abating anytime soon. We're seeing more and more cyber attacks hit the press on a daily basis. And this isn't just an IT issue. So we're not just talking about the backroom boys in IT having to solve this problem. This is an all-of-business problem. Your boards need to be aware of the cyber risks, audit committees, executives, and so on. Everybody has a role to play in cybersecurity, and everybody, as I will show firsthand after, has a role to play when it comes to responding to incidents. And everybody needs to know where their place is. You know, and I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, we'll talk about Australia, and now I'm talking about Target. But the Target incident in the States shows very quickly that the CEO lost his job out of it, the CIO and the Chief Security Officer lost their jobs, and 7 of the 10 board members. There's over 140 law cases that are open at the moment, and the cost of recovery, which was simply from theft of about, I think about 70 million credit cards, is well over $1 billion of cost to the business, and the share price hasn't recovered. And one area that I want to highlight is that very last comment on there, in terms of our responsibility under the Corporations Act as well. We can't bury our head in the sand on these things. If we are to experience an attack, we've got a duty of care for our clients, and we need to put all diligence, and we can be held personally responsible as directors of businesses for cyber. Now, this slide that I've put together here actually is quite amazing when you look at it in a bit more detail. But the World Economic Forum to come together once a year, and part of what they do is ask to vote on what they think are the top 5 risks to the global economy. And in 2012, cyber attacks made that list for the first time. You can see it there at number 4. Missed out on 2013. It was actually number 6 on 2013, and it's back on again in 2014. So the world economy sees cyber attacks and cyber risks as now one of the top 5 issues facing the global economy. Now, it's quite amazing when you actually look at the other comments around that. We're comparing that to climate change, income disparity and things like that. The fact that that's even amongst that list is quite amazing in its own right. So the global economy is very fearful. So what I'm here today to do, though, is to take you through the journey of Distribute IT. So what I'll do is I'll give you just a little bit of background on the business itself, just so you can understand who we were, how we were structured, how we dealt with regulators. And then I ask you just to think about this whilst I'm going through the presentation on perhaps how it would relate to your businesses and how you would manage an incident yourself if you were to go through it. I'm not here to really tell everybody this is the right thing, like we went through this issue and we did everything right. I'm just here to tell you what we did and the fallout from that. And then at the end, perhaps we'll go through some of the key learnings and take some questions. So, Distribute IT, who were we? It was formed in 2002. Now, those of you that can remember back to the late 90s, we went through a technology boom in the late 90s, and then we went through a period called the tech wreck around about 2000, 2001. And some of the things that were happening back in those days were the global governments, and certainly the Australian government as well, was trying to come up with some sort of idea about how they would regulate this emerging internet into the market, how they would also regulate the products and services that were likely to come out of the space as well. And one of the things that happened back then was the Australian government put into place an organisation called the AUDA, or .au Domain Authority. Their job was to put in place a fair market structure for domain names, and obviously put into place also fair regulation for consumers and operators in the space. And they created a three-tier market. Now, those, again, who can remember back then will probably remember Melbourne IT created the .au domain, and they formed that public company around it, made a fortune out of it up until the deregulation in 2000. So part of it was also breaking down that monopoly position. So they created a three-tier structure. They appointed a registry operator. A registry operator provides just the backbone or the IT infrastructure. They then created a tier called a domain registrar. Now, a registrar goes through a formal accreditation process, very, very stringent. So it's IT operations, business operations, they even went through marketing and those sorts of aspects of business. And if you were lucky enough to become accredited, you then were granted a licence to connect to the registry, and the registrar's job is to buy and sell and trade domains to the public. And the licence holders themselves are known in the industry as a registrant. So we had to deal with the terms registry, registrar, registrant for a while. It took me a while to work it out as well. But back in those days, they were offering up 5 domain registrar licences, and that's where obviously the competition was going to come in. Now, my brother and I had just finished up at a previous organisation, and we saw a great opportunity to start our own business, and we thought what we'd do is we'd apply for one of those tenders for one of those 5 licences. So we put our heads together, put all the information together, went through a 9-month process to try and become accredited, and we were lucky enough to be granted one of those licences. We then formed Distribute IT around that, and then we were open for trading. We also wanted to be a bit different in our business, and I think this is a little bit on how it might relate to the way in which you deal with your IT providers. What we did is created our business around a channel-based strategy. So we built our business around resellers. So all our services were all designed to make our resellers as sticky as possible to our business, obviously trying to minimise client churn, but it also made those clients very heavily reliant on our IT infrastructure to perform the operations of their business. So we were your typical third-party provider, and I'm sure all the super funds across Australia use a lot of third-party providers. So think of us in terms of one of your providers. We also sold a few other products, and I did mention that we were a startup, and I think the first month we sold 2 domain names. So $100 worth of turnover was our first month. But we worked very hard at our business, and 7 days a week, and 9 years later, up until 2011, we turned that little startup into an enterprise that had offices in Melbourne, Jakarta, and about to open up in China. By that stage, our 2 domain names had turned into over 250,000 domain names, and we were growing our business database by about 4% per month. So how quickly we were growing. We also expanded into web server hosting using cloud-based technology, so we were hosting a lot of our clients' websites and infrastructure as well in a 3 data centre setup, and we sold other products like SMS. We had about 3,000 active resellers, so they're 3,000 clients that relied on us to on-sell domains and services to their clients as well. So with a 10% Australian market share and over 50% share in that reseller traffic for domains, we were a good, strong business and growing very, very fast. What we're here to talk about today, though, is the breaches that we went through. So what I'm going to do is just talk about this in a timeline fashion, and I'll just go through, in summary, some of the things that we had to deal with over this period and how we responded to these incidents. Now again, I'm not here to say we did the right thing. We'll just explain what we did and then what the outcomes of those were. So it all started for us on the 3rd of June 2011. Now, as Ellen mentioned before, we're an IT company. We knew security very, very well. That was our major risk. We spent a lot of money on security, we had good processes in place. We were always fending off attacks from hackers. It was a daily issue for our business. And in fact, just to give you an idea of even 3 years ago, just how big an issue hacking was, out of our 30,000 clients, which were mainly sort of SME level clients, we would on an average deal with 5 hacking issues per day for our clients. So that's where our clients had their websites defaced or data stolen or something of that nature. So you think about that, 5 per day, you think about it over a 12-month period, that is a significant percentage of the SME market that's getting hacked on an annual basis, and those stats never make the media. So with all those good processes in place, why was this incident different? Well, it was different because somebody managed to bypass every single security protocol that we had in place. They had top-level user access, so think about the top user in your IT environment. So top user access inside our networks, inside our firewalls, 100% free reign in any server inside our network. So that meant at any stage they could steal data, they could destroy infrastructure, they could pretty much do anything. And a pretty scary proposition, right? And it's not one I would hope any of you would have to go through. Now, we were alerted to this, or I was alerted to this through my CIO contacting me saying we've got a serious issue here and we need to deal with it. We were very aggressive in our response. We're obviously very worried by this, and in the regulation or the regulators that supported our industry, there was also, even though it wasn't written in policy, there was an underlying element of you must report breaches. So we felt obligated also to make sure that we reported breaches to our regulators. So we had a few problems to deal with. I said we responded aggressively. What we did is, the first thing is pull all 12 of our IT guys in Melbourne, and we had 30 staff overall, some of them are overseas, and I had 12 guys in my IT team in Melbourne. We pulled them into the data centre and started to talk about our response to it. Now, when I say our response was pretty extreme, what we did over the next 48 hours is we rebuilt our entire infrastructure from the ground up. We pulled everything out of the 3 data centres, we put new equipment in, obviously we reset passwords, new firewalls, the whole thing. We rebuilt everything from the ground up. So you can see how seriously we took the incident. It took 48 hours to do that, and it wasn't until Monday morning do we actually have our network and services back up and running again. Now, you all run websites. If you're down for half an hour on your websites, you're going to be jumping up and down with your providers pretty quick. Most of our clients were down for 48 hours during this period, so it was a major outage for the hosting sector. Monday came along, we managed to get everything back up and running again, and then we reported to our regulators. Now, we got hit with something that we didn't expect. Our regulators made us reset all 250,000 domain passwords, and we had to advise our clients of the new settings and prove to the regulators that we did that before we could reconnect back to the registry again. And we certainly didn't expect that. It took us almost 4 days to get that done. You can't reset 250,000 passwords one by one, so we had to write some software to get this done. So we've rebuilt our networks and we've had to reset these 250,000 passwords and advise clients. So Thursday, the domain systems came back up again. So our resellers lost 6 days of trade during this period. The other thing we wanted to do is be extremely cautious about the way that we reconnected clients back into our systems. Now, out of those 30,000 clients, we made the vast majority of them advise us in writing of which services they wanted connected, IP address, all the technical jargon that goes with it, photo ID, reasons for connecting, the whole works. And we connected them one by one back into our network infrastructure. So think about that, 30,000 clients connecting one by one back into your networks again. So that week, by the time Friday came around, we'd put in back-to-back 72-hour shifts. I think we had about 3 or 4 hours sleep in between. it was a major issue to get through all that work. But we got to Friday night and we felt pretty satisfied that we'd, I think the words that went around were, I think we might have dodged a bullet here. We reset our networks, we jumped ahead in some of the work that we wanted to do, and we felt like we were in very good shape going forward. I jumped forward. Less than 24 hours later, all that hard work we'd put in the week before was a complete waste of time. The hackers are straight back into our network again at 4:30 in the afternoon. And we were alerted to this by our monitoring going haywire, so we saw servers going offline every few seconds. And that's how we initially saw what was happening, but very quickly after that it became evident what was going on. The hackers did 3 things to us. First thing they did is they defaced our primary website and replaced it with just a blank page, and they put on that page, "You have been hacked," used the moniker of evil, put all the passwords down from our internal network on that page, and a comment on the bottom says, "Good luck recovering." That's the first thing they did. Second thing they did is they had access inside our networks, in behind our firewalls. They locked us out of our own environment. They had complete 100% control of our environment. Not even our master IT users could get back inside our own infrastructure. Third thing they did is they embedded a program inside our network to cascade through the servers and destroy them. They ran very simple Unix commands on the servers that just destroys the data or scrambles the data on the hard drives, and it renders the servers completely useless. It only takes a few seconds to destroy a server using this command. Now, 4:30 on Saturday was also a very strategic time of the week for us because it was the only time of the week where our backups engaged to the network. Normally, they sat on our third data center and they're completely offline. On Saturday night at 4:30, we switched them on, and then we started our backup process, which took anywhere up to 48 hours given the size of our infrastructure. They knew that. They waited for that because this attack was very targeted. They went after our core trading platforms first. They went after our ability to trade. That was the first thing that was targeted. Core trading platforms, backups of those systems. Then they went after major shared clients. Then they went after some of the lesser servers in there. So it was a very coordinated attack. And the only way we could get control of our own network was to physically go to the data center and pull the plug out of the wall. That's the only way we could get control of it. And that's exactly what we did. 45 minutes from start to finish. First alert to us pulling the plug. But I can tell you by then the damage was done. Of course, at that stage, we didn't know how big the issue was or how long it was going to take to recover, but we certainly knew we had a major problem on our hands. I had to make 12 very unfortunate phone calls to my IT guys. Said, "Sorry, boys, need to come back into the data centre again. We've got another problem." Thankfully, they did that, and we started the process of trying to exactly work out what had happened, how were we going to recover. And I can tell you, even at those early stages, I've already got very exhausted teams from the week before. There was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety going through the business, and obviously a lot of worry. We were already starting to worry about why we were being targeted. Are we going to be able to recover? Is this going to keep happening? Anyway, once we sort of worked out what was going on, it took a few hours for us to work it out. We decided in the end that what we did next was probably driven more out of recovering the business than blocking the hackers. I think we thought that whatever we did the week before was pretty useless in terms of locking the hackers out. So our next steps were all built around trying to recover our business, trying to get our business operations online. But we knew in the back of our mind that there was a fair chance that the hackers would come back in again, but that was an issue we had to deal with. So what we ended up doing is over the next 48 hours, we did a lot of what we did the week before. We weren't able to identify the entry points properly the first week, obviously, with what happened. So we were a little bit of a loss exactly what we should do to try and recover systems. So we ended up doing a lot of what we did the week before. You know, rebuilding networks, rebuilding systems, passwords, you know, essentially a lot of what happened before. Took us another 48 hours. And it wasn't until Monday night did we actually connect our network back up again. But that was all we had running, our core network. All the services that ran off that, all our trading platforms, all client services were still down at that point. And at this stage, we said to ourselves, what have we done wrong? You know, who have we upset? And how bad is this thing going to get for us? What I didn't know was it was really just beginning. What we'd experienced in the past week and a bit was nothing compared to what we're about to experience. Now, I'll run through this again in a timeline fashion, and I'll start on the 12th. Everybody notice up there's a comment underneath the 12th that says client comms. We had to come up with a way of communicating with our clients what was going on. Our VoIP systems were hacked, our email was hacked, our websites were hacked, our client databases were hacked. So we had to come up with a comms plan when we actually had no means of communicating with anybody. And even if we didn't know who our clients were anyway. That was the mandate for a comms plan. It was pretty simple what we did in the end. We just replaced our Distribute IT website page with a blog page, and we were posting regular updates on recovery efforts, and we created a Gmail account for our clients to email us questions. Just to give you an idea of how quickly things can explode, we were used to dealing with about 300 emails a day in our support queue. That was sort of typical for us. From the 12th and every day thereafter, we averaged 20,000 emails in that support queue. You know, most of your team are trying to recover networks and servers, so we're already pulling resources from our support team, and you got 20,000 emails a day. It very quickly blew up into a situation that we couldn't handle. And that happened very quickly within 24 hours. Social media started to kick in. Already, by the 12th, 13th, the hashtag DIT or Distribute IT fail started to trend on Twitter. Forums were going crazy with comments and threads about what was going on with the business. And even our competitors were starting to run fire sale offers. Bring your infrastructure across to us and we'll look after you better than Distribute IT. So they were a helpful bunch during that process as well. Of course, regulators came back into the picture again. We'd had another breach, another compromise. We reported to our regulators, and we were going to have to go through all that domain reset process again. So all these issues, building networks, recovering from backups, now you've got regulators on your case, client pressure is building, media pressure is building. All these things are starting to compound on top of us, and I can tell you that after another 48 hours straight by the 13th, we were exhausted. And we still had another, 10 days to run of this thing. We started to pull together our board to start to talk about, obviously we're talking about it the entire time, but to understand how we would properly manage the crisis. So we talked about what we would do in 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, but we already started to look ahead, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. How different would the business look? Do we have to do anything now to make sure that we satisfied our obligations for our clients, our regulators, and ASIC and whoever else might get involved with this along the journey. We also got the AFP involved at this stage of the process and managed to do a fairly monumental task of getting about 90% of our servers back up and running again by the 14th. Looks like a nice impressive number considering what had happened, but the reality was the 10% that was left was all the important stuff. All our trading platforms, all the backups, and about 20,000 of our hosted customers had their servers destroyed and backups compromised to some level still at that point. So when we did an assessment, I think when we sat down and said, how long is this going to take to recover when we're looking at board meetings, we felt that it could take anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks at this stage. And that was the severity of the damage in our business, which is obviously why we were looking at how the business would look going down the track. By the 15th, customers started to get sick of the whole thing. 9 years worth of goodwill that we put into our business, and we valued our business on service and support to clients. That's why clients came with us, because we provided a good product and service. 4 days into a crisis, all that good work, gone. Customers were starting to turn away from us, transferring domains, picking up infrastructure. The client churn was really kicking in a big way. It happens very, very fast. And that's exactly what happened to us. Our staff started to hit the wall. Extreme pressure, tired, everything else. Some people are invested in a business and will stick with you to the last day, some are not. So my 12 turned into 9 by this stage. And by the 15th, my CIO was so exhausted, he actually collapsed on the data centre floor. And we had to get medical treatment for him. So it's just how much pressure was starting to pile onto the individuals involved. Luckily for us, he turned up a couple of days later, but it'll give you just the idea of just how much pressure it is. But when that happens and your key people start to fall away around you, everything starts to grind down to a halt. And things that might have happened quickly early, you run out of time very, very quickly. Then it starts to slow down. Now on the 16th, a very pivotal day for us, we hit mainstream press. We were largely behind the scenes, we were a wholesale provider, people didn't really know us. But on the 16th they did. We made front page news in New South Wales. Not a very nice article was written about us and management and lack of backups and whatever sells papers, right? That was what was printed. We made mainstream press front page news in Melbourne the next day. And during the next 3 or 4 days, we made front page news in New Zealand, the UK and the US. I just couldn't believe how big this whole story grew. Show of hands, anybody heard of the hacking group Anonymous? A few of you, well, okay, it's quite popular. They sent us an email during this period, and to show you how big the story got, saying it wasn't us. So we're dealing with media, the pressure of media. We didn't know how to deal with media. We never had to deal with media before, but now we were. And it all culminated in media crews camping at our doorstep. So every time you wanted to go out for a break or anything like that, you'd have a microphone stuck under your face. And of course, when things hit the media, a lot more pressure on our staff. They weren't equipped to deal with the media either. It accelerated client churn as well, and a lot of more pressure. And just this accelerating pressure, as you can understand, on the business. In our board meetings, we're now starting to question our solvency. We couldn't trade. Were we technically insolvent? What about our insurances? We even started to speak to administrators at this point in time as well. We felt that it was quite possible we weren't going to be able to trade out of this situation. So with all that media pressure, of course, everything blows out of all proportion. We had calls from banks about PCI compliance. We had calls from the Privacy Commissioner. We had calls from everybody that wanted a piece of the action, I think. We even had a call, believe it or not, from the Prime Minister's office, because they were concerned that the regulator wasn't doing enough, and they also wanted to know what the AFP was doing about it because it became such a big story. So it's just how crazy the whole thing got. Around that time as well, we also had to make a rather unfortunate announcement during that period that we'd lost 4 of our key client servers and all 5 backups that we had. So we have 5 levels of backups for everything. So all 5. And we're talking about client servers that had 4,500 hosted websites on there. So these are people that relied on us to host their infrastructure, and they've lost everything as well. That's 4,500 SME businesses that lost all their websites, software, data, the whole works. And just spare a poor thought for our resellers at this stage as well. They're now going through another period of 9 or 10 days in the second week where they can't trade either. They're going through their own crisis and they're completely helpless. They can't do anything about it and just have to wait it out. So this is all the residual fallout that comes from something like this down the track. It's not just about us, it's about the fallout with businesses that happen down the track as well. And I don't know what the monetary cost of the fallout was in the end, but it would have been well in excess of 10 to 20 million for our clients as well. Now by the 21st, we got into a weekend around that period, and although we went into that weekend period with relative support from our regulators, so all those lunches we'd shouted over the years had come back to help us during that period, we came out of that weekend and that support had changed. Now we were issued from all our regulators with what was called a breach notice, and you're probably very familiar with what a breach notice is in your sector. Breach notice in the domain sector is very simple. It says, we do not feel you're able to perform the obligations of being a registrar. They give you a time frame to fix up the issue, or they enact their contingency plans. Now, contingency plans are pretty simple in the domain name game. They take all your domain names and they give it to one of your competitors, and they wipe your business out in an instant. We had a secondary problem with this as well. Resellers. Resellers weren't recognised in the domain industry. So if we lost our domains to our competitors, our resellers would have lost their domains to our competitors, and it would have wiped out 3,000 resellers as well, just to compound all the issues that we're going through. And I mentioned the time frame. And we felt around this period, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, we were still away from recovering. We were making progress, but it was still very slow. They gave us 24 hours to sort it out. So that was it. Time was up for us. And I must admit, throwing the hands up in the air and giving up at this point in time was a very strong consideration, because we knew at this point in time with the issue of those notices that our business was gone. What we did next, I think, was probably driven out of a lot of relationships we'd built up over the years with our resellers and customers. We really at least wanted to help them come up with a solution and not have them lose their domains and services as well. So what we did is we contacted a company called Net Registry in New South Wales, a larger provider than us. They'd made several offers on our business in the previous 2 years. And we contacted them. Obviously, they knew what was going on, and we said, look, we just want to come up with something for our clients. Long story short, within 24 hours, we negotiated a sale of assets of our business to Net Registry. We went through all the legals, contracts, the whole works on a full acquisition deal inside 24 hours. So I'll challenge anybody to beat that. And the next day, the people from Net Registry came down to Melbourne, handed us a cheque for the assets, which unfortunately for us was a lot less than the offer they'd made 3 months prior. And it wasn't enough for us to cover our obligations at the bank either, so we had to liquidate our business after this. We handed them the keys to the business, went and handed our cheque to the bank, and that was it. Almost sounds like as simple as that, as cold as that. Contracts exchanged, go to the bank, walked out of the bank, we looked at each other and went, we've just lost everything. What had happened? And then we went to the coffee shop and sat there for about 2 or 3 hours, never said a word to each other for that time. We didn't really need to. And that was it. That was the business. Pretty harrowing story, and I'm telling it because I'm seeing it more and more in industry. It's happening in this country. You know, people are losing businesses to the extent that we have through destruction of data. It's more common to see the theft of data and credit cards and that sort of thing. That's the more common hacks that we're seeing, but it can be equally as devastating as you see what happened with Target as well. So, yeah, I'm just hoping people learn from the experience and learn from the journey, and hopefully take something away and relate it to your own businesses and the way that perhaps you interact with your IT providers. And also think about how you would react and respond if you were to manage an incident yourself. Now, I think we're a bit tight for time.
Yes,
so
we are
sorry
tight
about
for time,
that.
but no, that's okay.
But we'll hand it over to questions.
Lights up, and let me do some exercise. Come on. Who's got the first question? Right in the middle of the room. Stand up and I'll jog towards you.
Great story, thank you very much, and yeah, obviously very emotional for you. Did you ever find out who and why?
Who and why? Yeah, well, a very interesting story in its own right. So during the media frenzy period, we call it, of somewhere between the 18th and 20th, in amongst our, I think, probably 150,000 emails by then, we happened to trip across an odd one. And it was an anonymous tip-off. So somebody actually sent through an email saying, I'm not going to tell you who I am, but I know who did this. And here's the name of the person, the address of the person, and the mobile number of the person. And his reason for telling us was that he knew the guy and something needed to be done about him. Now, we were too busy dealing with our own issues, so we sent that off to the AFP, and we didn't know if it was credible or not. But we get a call about 3 weeks later from the AFP, and the AFP says to us, hey boys, we've made an arrest. So, oh, that's fabulous. So hang on, before we get carried away, we haven't arrested the guy for your hack, but it's the guy you tipped us off about. Yeah, okay, explain. And the AFP said, well, when we got the tip off, we went and put surveillance in his house. So we're talking about, you know, cameras and microphones, the whole works, trying to build up a case against the perpetrator. And they had to urgently take him down on a Friday night because he was about to push the button on what he did to us to another 360 corporations across Australia. So he had network access, embedded that program to destroy infrastructure in 360 other networks. I didn't even believe the AFP when they told me. And they would never tell me who, But the AFP use a term in their presentations around this. They call it a digital Armageddon event in Australia. That's just how seriously they took it. The guy ended up doing 2.5 years for the attempted hacks on the 360s. He's already on the street and probably looking at your computers while you're in here at this conference. And for the record, unemployed truck driver from New South Wales, wanted to get into the IT industry, had been knocked back from several jobs, very angry at the industry, no connection with me whatsoever. Never applied for a job, was never a customer, nothing, completely random attack. And he was so angry at the industry, this was his way of getting back at the industry, and we were just his first target. To answer your question, sir? Yep.
Yeah, my question was more about that 4:30 p.m. on the Friday afternoon link that seemed to be...
The first week or the second week?
The second, the major.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Particularly at 4:30 p.m, I wondered if the guy had inside information, that was all.
Yeah, it's actually probably a bigger question than you even realise. It comes down to how long had the perpetrator been in the network, and this comes back to a lot of the way in which we responded to the very first incident in week 1. So we took a almost an emotional response, and we went and rebuilt everything. But what we'd done inadvertently is that we'd told the hacker that we knew about him. And given how organised that second week was in terms of the way in which he destroyed our infrastructure, I have no doubt that he was in there sometime prior to that first incident. And then when we alerted him to the fact that we knew about him by taking the actions that we did, we've then given him a limited window to enact his plans. So in hindsight, so it's an important issue because in hindsight, the emotional response and the way in which we responded to the incident, in my opinion, now is the wrong way to do it. I think a more cautious approach, forensic analysis, have a really good look in the systems and networks, find out what those true entry points were, and try and understand what's going on and then do a more targeted response that would lock down all those entry points, because smart hackers always have more than one entry point. Now, when I talk about entry points as well, which is sort of a follow-on to that question as well, we did identify how the guy got in there. There was a couple of secondary points, which I've just mentioned. He did have some entry points, but he ended up coming in our network through some social engineering. He'd made contact with the company. He'd spoken to my guys in support. He'd made an effort to try and get to know my guys in support. And the whole idea was he wanted to isolate somebody in my team who he thought was, first of all, senior enough, and second of all, vulnerable enough that he could target. And he homed in on the second in charge in our IT area. Spoke to that guy, exchanged emails with that chap, and somehow managed to put some malware onto his laptop at home, which was undetectable by all the malware checkers that we had in place, which a lot of the really good stuff is. And he was building up a repository of passwords and whatever the guy keyed into the laptop. And that was one of only 2 secure laptops into our network, and it was also the same chap that was resetting all the passwords on the day of the incident. All right? And on the second night in question, around the 4:30 on that second Saturday night, he then used a keyhole. He left himself back into that laptop to access the VPN into the network, and that's how he got access to it.
And in the couple of minutes that we've got left, Carl, we were talking earlier and you were saying that, a lot of the superannuation funds in the room will outsource their IT to third-party providers such as you were. Given that ASIC has said today that their target population needs a framework to manage their cyber risk, how do you do that when you outsource your IT?
Well, it's a very good question and probably need more than 25 seconds to answer.
Take a couple of minutes.
But I think the key point is there's 2 points that come out of this at the end of the day. Yeah, we unfortunately don't live in a world anymore where it could be if we experience an attack. First of all, it's when we experience an attack. So you always have to be mindful of the fact that it will happen to you at some point in time. The second part of that is you cannot outsource the risk. It's nice to go and send your data off to third-party providers and have them manage the IT. It all sounds really nice, probably a cheaper way to do things, but the risk is still yours. You still maintain, you still manage the risk. So whatever happens at those providers is your responsibility. And you need to make sure you put the risk and management frameworks in place that protect you against that. So have a backup plan for the data that's stored in there. What are you going to do if that data is compromised? What will you do if that data is destroyed? I mean, what would happen in the super industry if all the client data and banking information was destroyed and nobody knew where all the funds were or who they belonged to?
So you're left with a bucket of money and nothing else.
Yeah, as long as it ends up in my account, that's okay. That's right. So, it's all about the fact that you just can't outsource the risk elements, and I think that's the key message in that. Okay.